Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. On November 3rd, 1910, the Taney County Republican published an unusual notice warning travelers against venturing alone into the deep woods between Forsyth and Branson. The brief paragraph, tucked between advertisements for patent medicines and farm equipment, stated simply that recent unfortunate incidents suggest the wisdom of traveling in groups of no fewer than 3 persons when passing through the forest regions of eastern Taney County. What the notice failed to mention was that by the time it appeared, 7 people had already vanished from those woods. The Ozarks of 1910 was a region of scattered settlements, connected by primitive logging roads and footpaths that wound through dense forest and limestone hills. Many homesteads were miles from their nearest neighbors, and travelers often found themselves alone on isolated trails where the canopy overhead was so thick that midday could seem like dusk. In these shadowed woods, people had begun to disappear without explanation, leaving behind only arranged possessions and unanswered questions. Local authorities initially attributed the disappearances to mundane dangers, falls from hidden limestone bluffs, attacks by predatory animals, or simply becoming lost in the labyrinthine terrain. But as the pattern continued, a more disturbing possibility emerged. Something or someone was hunting solitary travelers in the deep woods of Taney County. The notice came too late for those already taken, their fate sealed in the shadows between the ancient oaks and pines. Their stories, pieced together from official reports, witness testimonies, and evidence discovered years later, reveal a horror that the simple newspaper warning only hinted at. A horror that continues to echo through the Ozark Hills more than a century later, whispering a simple truth: never go alone into the deep woods. Samuel Bridger was the first to vanish, though at the time his disappearance seemed unremarkable. A 42-year-old timber surveyor from Springfield, Bridger had spent 15 years mapping virgin timber tracts throughout the Ozarks for lumber companies. On April 12, 1910, he departed his boarding house in Hollister before dawn, telling his landlady he expected to return by nightfall. His intended route would take him through an unmapped section of forest approximately 12 miles east of Forsyth. The storekeeper at Hollister's general store later confirmed that Bridger had purchased coffee, bacon, and tobacco that morning, appearing in good spirits and mentioning clear weather would make for good surveying. This was the last confirmed sighting of Samuel Bridger. When he failed to return that evening, his landlady initially assumed he had camped overnight, a common practice in his profession. After 3 days without word, she reported his absence to the local sheriff. A search party found Bridger's equipment 3 days later, his transit, compass, notebook, and pack arranged in a perfect circle at the base of a massive oak tree. The items were undamaged and positioned with unnatural precision, as if deliberately placed. There was no sign of blood, struggle, or the man himself. The ground around the site showed no tracks, other than what appeared to be Bridger's own. Sheriff Thompson concluded that Bridger had likely suffered a heart attack or similar natural event while working and had been dragged away by scavenging animals, though this explanation failed to account for the careful arrangement of his possessions. The case might have remained a footnote in county records, if not for Bridger's journal recovered from his boarding room. The final entries noted something that took on new significance in light of later events. April 10. Observed unusual markings on trees in eastern sector. Vertical grooves approximately 7 feet from ground. Not consistent with bear claws or lightning strikes. April 11. Strange sensation today of being watched. Glimpsed movement several times, but found no one when investigated. Perhaps nerves from working alone too long. By late May 1910, a disturbing pattern had begun to emerge in eastern Taney County. 2 more individuals had vanished under circumstances that echoed Bridger's disappearance. Margaret Thorne, a 8-year-old schoolteacher, disappeared on May 8th while walking the 3-mile path from her boarding house to Cedar Valley School. When she failed to arrive, the school sent a senior student to inquire about her absence. A subsequent search discovered her lunch pail and teaching materials a quarter-mile off the main path, arranged neatly on a fallen log. Like Bridger's possessions, the items showed no damage and were positioned with unnatural precision. The path showed no signs of struggle, though tracker John Hempton noted that the ground appeared swept clean in a 10-foot radius around the recovered items. Just 2 weeks later, on May 22nd, elderly herb gatherer Constance Ritter vanished while collecting medicinal plants. The 6-year-old widow regularly ventured into the woods alone despite her arthritic condition, carrying a distinctive willow-gathering basket. Neighbors became concerned after 2 days without seeing smoke from her chimney. A search party discovered her basket hanging from a tree branch approximately 15 feet above the ground, an impossible placement for the elderly woman with limited mobility. The basket still contained freshly gathered herbs, suggesting she had been actively working when taken. The surrounding area again showed that peculiar swept quality, as if all tracks and signs had been deliberately erased. Sheriff Thompson expanded his search efforts, bringing in dogs from Springfield, but the animals refused to track beyond the sites where the possessions were found, whining and backing away despite encouragement. The disappearances sparked growing fear among local residents. Parents began accompanying their children to school, and those who lived in isolated homesteads took to sleeping with loaded rifles near their beds. The Henderson brothers were known throughout Taney County as experienced woodsmen who had trapped and hunted in the Ozark forest since childhood. Daniel, 34, and Michael, 31, operated a successful trapping business, supplying pelts to fur buyers in Springfield and occasionally serving as guides for hunting parties from St. Louis and Kansas City. When rumors began circulating about dangers in the eastern woods, Daniel Henderson openly mocked such concerns. "Been working these woods since I could walk," he told patrons at Wilson's General Store. "Ain't nothing out there I can't handle." Despite his brother's uncharacteristic unease about recent events, Daniel insisted on checking his trapline alone on June 8, 1910, leaving their cabin at dawn with his rifle and pack. When he failed to return by nightfall, Michael set out at first light to find him. What he discovered would permanently shatter his sanity. According to his statement to Sheriff Thompson, Michael found his brother's body suspended from a massive oak tree, a rope around his neck. Yet the scene defied logical explanation. Daniel's feet were still touching the ground. The rope was slack enough that it shouldn't have caused strangulation, and his hands were not bound. Nevertheless, the medical examination confirmed he had been dead for at least 12 hours, apparently from asphyxiation. Most disturbing was the absence of any signs of struggle or self-harm. Michael Henderson's mental state deteriorated rapidly following the discovery. He became convinced that he had witnessed the rope tightening by itself around his brother's neck, claiming that the trees did it, and that they can move when you aren't looking. Within 2 weeks, Michael was committed to the state lunatic asylum in Nevada, Missouri, diagnosed with acute mania. He would remain institutionalized until his death in 1926, never recanting his impossible account of what happened to his brother. By early July 1910, the disappearances and Daniel Henderson's inexplicable death had attracted attention beyond Taney County. The Western Timber Consortium, which had employed several surveyors, including Samuel Bridger, to assess logging potential in the region, expressed concern to federal authorities about the safety of their operations. In response, the U.S. Marshal's Office assigned Deputy Marshal James Corbett to investigate. Corbett arrived in Forsyth on July 5, establishing a temporary office in the county courthouse. Unlike the local sheriff, who had treated each incident as an isolated event, Corbett approached the investigation methodically, reviewing all available evidence and interviewing everyone connected to the victims. His background as a former Pinkerton detective brought professional rigor to the inquiry. Within 2 weeks, Corbett had identified several significant patterns. All disappearances had occurred between dawn and dusk, never during full darkness. All victims had been alone at the time they vanished. Most tellingly, when plotted on a map, all incidents fell within a roughly 40-square-mile region in eastern Taney County, centered around a limestone ridge known locally as Devil's Backbone. This geographic focus suggested a predator with a defined territory rather than random acts of violence or misadventure. Corbett's interview transcripts, preserved in federal archives, reveal another pattern he found troubling. Multiple residents, when asked if they had heard any local legends about the woods, mentioned the Watcher in the Trees, a figure said to follow solitary travelers but never approach groups. This folklore element had not been included in any official reports but appeared consistently in Corbett's interviews. His notes indicate growing concern that local superstition might contain elements of truth, reflecting real experiences with a human predator who had been operating in the region undetected. While interviewing adult witnesses yielded inconsistent results, Corbett discovered that the children of Taney County shared remarkably similar experiences regarding the eastern woods. Initially reluctant to include such accounts in his official investigation, Corbett nevertheless documented them in his personal journal, later submitted to the federal archives. In separate interviews, children from at least 12 different families described seeing a tall man who appeared when they played alone near the forest edge. Elizabeth Parker, age 9, told Corbett, "He stands very still between the trees. If you look right at him, he don't move at all. But if you look away and then back, he's closer." James Wilson, age 11, described seeing a man with a stretched face, watching him while he fished alone. "He wears old-timey clothes like in my grandpa's pictures, but they don't fit him right," the boy reported. "When my dad called me for supper, I looked back and the man was gone without making any noise." Most disturbing was the testimony of Sarah Miller, age 7, who claimed the figure had spoken to her, though what she heard wasn't real talking, but like someone trying to remember how talking works. When asked to demonstrate, she produced a series of clicks and hums that Corbett described as causing involuntary shivers among those present. Cedar Valley schoolteacher Abigail Morrison provided Corbett with 7 drawings collected from her students, all created independently during a lesson about the local forest. Each depicted a similar figure, unnaturally tall and thin, partially hidden among trees, always positioned as if watching. Morrison noted that she had not prompted the subject matter, yet nearly half her class had produced variations of the same image. The first credible adult testimony came from Reverend Thomas Ashford, pastor of Cedar Valley Baptist Church. On July 22, 1910, Ashford was traveling alone to visit an elderly parishioner who lived in an isolated cabin near the eastern woods. Taking a shortcut through a stand of oak trees, Ashford noticed a figure standing motionless approximately 60 yards from the path. In his sworn statement to Corbett, Ashford described the encounter. "At first I thought it was a man leaning against a tree, perhaps a hunter resting. I called out a greeting but received no response. As I observed more carefully, I realized the figure was unnaturally still, not shifting weight or showing the small movements that living creatures naturally make. Most disturbing was the absence of any visible breathing. I called out again, asking if assistance was needed, and when no response came, I felt a strong sense of danger. I decided to continue walking, and when I glanced back after perhaps 20 paces, the figure had moved considerably closer without my hearing any footsteps. This movement, without sound, frightened me deeply. I quickened my pace, and as I did, I began to hear footsteps in the forest, paralleling my own, matching my cadence exactly. These steps continued until I reached the Sullivan homestead approximately 1 mile further along the path. Ashford's reputation as a sober, trustworthy church leader gave weight to an account that might otherwise have been dismissed. Corbett noted that the Reverend appeared genuinely shaken, even days after the incident, and had refused further solitary travels through the woods. On August 3, 1910, after consulting with the county sheriff and U.S. Marshal's office, Corbett organized a large-scale search operation. 23 armed men, including experienced hunters and trackers, set out at dawn to systematically explore the eastern woods, particularly the area around Devil's Backbone where most incidents had occurred. To cover the extensive territory, the group divided into smaller teams, a decision that would prove fatal. Thomas Whitaker and James Pendleton, both local farmers with extensive woodland experience, were part of a 3-man team with Franklin Miller assigned to search a dense ravine. According to Miller's subsequent statement, Pendleton believed he heard someone calling for help and moved approximately 50 yards ahead to investigate. When he didn't return after several minutes, Whitaker followed his trail while Miller remained at their position. Whitaker returned alone nearly 30 minutes later, visibly shaken. he reported finding Pendleton's rifle leaning against a tree with drag marks leading away from the spot. The two men followed the trail, which extended about 30 yards before vanishing completely, as if Pendleton had been lifted from the earth. The search was immediately redirected to locate the missing man. At dusk, as the teams were preparing to return to town, a tracker discovered Pendleton's body seated upright against a massive oak, approximately half a mile from where he had disappeared. His eyes were open, his expression described by multiple witnesses as reflecting extraordinary terror. Dr. Samuel Wilson examined the body on site and could identify no obvious cause of death, no wounds, no signs of strangulation, no evidence of animal attack. His preliminary conclusion was that Pendleton's heart had simply stopped, possibly from extreme shock or fear. In the days following the search party tragedy, Deputy Marshal Corbett isolated himself in his temporary office, reviewing all evidence and testimonies collected since his arrival. His notes from this period, discovered years later, reveal his growing recognition of a pattern that had been present from the beginning but not previously connected. The deliberate positioning of victims and their belongings. Daniel Henderson's body arranged in a hanging position that wasn't physically capable of causing death. Margaret Thorne's lunch pail and teaching materials placed with geometric precision on a log. Pendleton seated against a tree in a position that mimicked rest but lacked the natural slumping of a body that had died in that position. Samuel Bridger's surveying equipment arranged in a perfect circle. Each scene showed evidence of careful arrangement, suggesting not random violence but purposeful composition. Corbett wrote, "These are not the actions of a traditional murderer seeking to hide his crimes, nor of a predatory animal following instinct. The precise positioning suggests an intelligence that is studying its victims, arranging them and their possessions in ways that mimic human behavior but lack authentic understanding of it. I am increasingly convinced we face something that watches humans from afar, learning through observation but fundamentally miscomprehending what it sees. Most disturbing is the implication that this entity is not merely killing but experimenting, attempting to recreate human postures and activities using the bodies of its victims, as if trying to understand through arrangement what it cannot comprehend through normal interaction." The investigation gained unexpected academic dimension with the arrival of Dr. Elizabeth Winters, an anthropologist from Washington University in St. Louis. Having read newspaper accounts of the incidents, Winters contacted Corbett in early August, explaining her specialized research into isolated communities and folklore. She had been documenting Ozark legends for several years, and believed the current events might connect to historical patterns she had identified. After reviewing Corbett's files, Winters shared her own research findings. French trapping journals, from the 1,780 seconds, preserved in St. Louis historical archives, contained multiple references to l'homme immobile, the motionless man, described as a figure that watched their camps from forest edges but disappeared when approached. Winters had previously dismissed these accounts as campfire tales, until discovering similar descriptions in Cherokee oral histories from before European contact. These stories spoke of a being that mimicked human form but lacked essential humanity, described as empty behind the eyes and capable of standing motionless for days while observing human settlements. Most significantly, Winters had traced geographical connections between these historical accounts and the current incidents, all centered around the limestone formations of eastern Taney County. Rather than supernatural explanation, Winters proposed that the legends described an isolated human population, potentially inbred over generations, that had developed abnormal behaviors through extreme separation from society. Her academic curiosity overriding caution, Winters announced her intention to conduct field research in the area, believing her scientific training would allow her to observe objectively where locals were influenced by superstition. Dr. Winters departed her boarding house in Forsyth at dawn on September 4, 1910, carrying her field notebook, a Kodak camera, and provisions for a day's exploration. She informed her landlady that she intended to photograph sites mentioned in local legends and expected to return by evening. When she failed to appear by the following morning, Corbett immediately organized a search. For 3 days, teams methodically covered the area where Winters had indicated she would be working, finding no trace until the afternoon of September 7th, when a hunting party discovered her camera. The instrument hung from a tree branch by its leather strap, approximately 7 feet above the ground. Examination revealed that the camera was undamaged, but the film had been carefully removed. The back panel opened precisely according to design rather than forced. This level of manipulation suggested knowledge of the device's mechanics that seemed inconsistent with an isolated woodland dweller. The following day, searchers found Winter's field notebook approximately 1 mile from where the camera had been recovered. The book was open to what appeared to be her final entry. September 4. I have found the watching place. The perspective from here allows observation of all major paths without being seen. Scrape marks on tree bark suggest prolonged occupancy. The arrangement of stones appears deliberate, creating hiding spaces with clear sight lines to the trail below. I am not alone here. I can hear. The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen stroke trailing off the page as if she had been interrupted suddenly. Despite expanded search efforts that continued for weeks, Dr. Winter's body was never recovered. Following the discovery of Dr. Winter's notebook, Corbett and 2 armed deputies located what she had described as the watching place, a natural blind formed by limestone outcroppings and dense undergrowth atop a bluff overlooking the junction of several forest paths. The position offered clear views of trails in multiple directions while remaining effectively invisible from below. Evidence suggested long-term use. The ground was worn smooth in places where someone had repeatedly stood or sat. Surrounding trees showed distinctive scrape marks at various heights. Nearby rocks had been subtly rearranged to create additional concealment. Most disturbing was the discovery of a small cache hidden beneath a flat stone, a collection that included buttons of various designs, a woman's tortoiseshell hairpin, a child's carved wooden horse, a pocket watch with the initials S.B., presumably Samuel Bridgers, and several other small items that appeared to have been taken from victims or found along the trails. Also in the cache was a stack of photographs, including several of Dr. Winters herself, images capturing her at various locations during her research, sometimes from considerable distances. These photos confirmed what Corbett had begun to suspect. The predator studied its victims extensively before striking, learning their habits and movements. The images showed signs of having been handled repeatedly, with smudges and creases suggesting they had been examined frequently. What they did not show was who had taken them, who had operated a complex mechanical device with sufficient skill to capture clear images, develop the film, and produce the photographs found in this primitive hiding place. The community's response to the mounting evidence of danger evolved rapidly through September and October 1910. Town meetings in Forsyth, Hollister, and smaller settlements established new safety protocols. No one was to travel alone under any circumstances, with a minimum group size of 3 adults required for any journey through wooded areas. Homesteads established safety stations where travelers could rest without being isolated, lanterns burning day and night to mark these havens. Armed patrols began regular sweeps of major paths, and school attendance dropped as parents kept children home rather than risk even group journeys. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Timber operations suspended activity, with companies unwilling to risk worker safety. Hunting and trapping, critical supplementary income for many families, virtually ceased. Merchants in towns reported business declining by half as people avoided all unnecessary travel. Many families with means relocated temporarily to Springfield or other larger communities, leaving their property under the watch of hired guards. Those who remained formed impromptu militias, with armed men taking shifts watching from church steeples and other elevated positions. The increased vigilance appeared effective. No disappearances occurred during this period of heightened awareness and group activity, but the psychological toll mounted steadily. Residents reported sleep disturbances, children suffered nightmares, and an atmosphere of constant tension pervaded the region. Sheriff Thompson's records show a marked increase in reports of suspicious sounds and sightings, most proving to be products of heightened anxiety rather than actual threat. As winter approached, bringing earlier dusk and extended darkness, the predator's behavior changed dramatically. On October 14, 1910, three men traveling together on the main road between Forsyth and Cedar Valley were attacked at dusk. According to survivors William Crawford and Joseph Miller, they were walking closely grouped when a large rock struck their companion, Robert Chambers, in the back of the head with tremendous force. The impact killed him instantly, crushing his skull. Crawford and Miller reported hearing no sound of approach and seeing no movement in the gathering darkness. Believing themselves under attack, they fired their rifles into the surrounding forest before retreating with Chambers' body. 9 days later, on October 23rd, four women returning from a church gathering in Hollister encountered a different tactic. As they walked the forest path in fading light, a deer carcass suddenly landed in their path, thrown from the woods with considerable force. The women scattered in panic, three running forward, while 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell fled in a different direction. Her companions reported hearing her scream briefly before silence fell. A search party found her body the following morning, seated beneath a tree with her hands carefully arranged in her lap, her head tilted slightly as if posed for a portrait. The medical examination revealed that her neck had been broken with a single powerful twist. These October attacks demonstrated the predator's adaptation to community defensive measures, learning that groups could be separated through creating chaos and that diminished visibility provided cover for approach. Most alarmingly, the attacks suggested intelligence and tactical thinking rather than opportunistic predation. Deputy Marshal Corbett, recognizing that conventional search methods had failed to locate the predator, developed a plan to draw it into the open. On November 2nd, 1910, his team positioned a mannequin dressed in women's clothing on a frequently traveled path at dawn. The figure, seated on a fallen log as if resting, was visible from several known observation points, while armed deputies concealed themselves in surrounding blinds. The trap was sprung shortly after sunrise, when deputies observed a figure emerging from the tree line approximately 80 yards from the mannequin. Witness accounts described the entity as tall and unnaturally thin, moving with strange mechanical precision toward the decoy. The figure reportedly paused several yards from the mannequin, tilting its head in what appeared to be confusion or assessment. When it moved closer and touched the figure's face, the deputies revealed themselves. The entity's response was immediate. Rather than showing surprise or fear, it moved with explosive speed toward the forest, covering ground faster than any man could run. According to multiple witnesses, deputies fired their weapons but apparently missed or inflicted no significant damage. The pursuit led to a narrow limestone cave entrance showing signs of recent passage, disturbed soil, and what appeared to be fresh scratch marks on the surrounding rock. The opening was too small for most men to enter comfortably, but showed evidence of frequent use. Corbett, determined not to lose the trail, decided to enter with 2 deputies, leaving the remainder of the team guarding the entrance. What Corbett and his deputies found inside the cave system would form the basis of both his official report and the private correspondence that revealed his true thoughts about the case. Approximately 20 feet inside the narrow entrance, the passage opened into a larger chamber showing clear signs of habitation. The official report documented evidence, including animal bones, primarily deer and small mammals, scattered human possessions consistent with items missing from victims, and crude bedding material formed from leaves and clothing scraps. What Corbett's official filing did not fully detail, but his private letters later revealed, was the disturbing arrangement of these items. Victim possessions had been organized in what appeared to be attempts to recreate human living spaces: a row of boots placed as if occupied by invisible feet, tools laid out as if in use, clothing arranged to approximate human forms. Most unsettling was the discovery of multiple sets of clothing from different historical periods, some appearing decades old, suggesting the cave had been occupied far longer than the recent disappearances indicated. The pursuit continued deeper into the cave system, where deputies reported glimpsing their quarry several times in the lamplight. Their descriptions varied dramatically. One claimed to have seen a deformed human. Another insisted it moved like an animal on all fours, while the third maintained that it seemed to shift between forms as shadows played across it. The pursuit ended when the passage became too unstable to safely navigate. Corbett made the decision to seal the entrance with dynamite rather than risk lives in the deteriorating tunnels. The explosion successfully collapsed the outer portion of the cave, though deputies reported hearing sounds from behind the rockfall for several hours afterward, described as neither human nor animal, but something attempting to mimic both. Corbett's official report to the U.S. Marshal's Office, submitted on November 10, 1910, concluded that the region had been terrorized by a deranged individual of unusual physical capability, likely having lived in isolation from normal society for an extended period, resulting in severely abnormal behavior patterns. This clinical assessment satisfied his superiors and provided a framework for local authorities to claim the threat had been contained. His private correspondence, however, revealed deeper uncertainty. In letters to a former Pinkerton colleague, discovered after Corbett's death in 1934, he wrote, "What we encountered in those Ozark woods defies simple classification. I believe it may once have been human, or descended from humans who retreated from civilization generations ago. Isolation and inbreeding across decades or longer appears to have created something that exists at the boundary of humanity, physically recognizable as one of us, yet fundamentally alien in its thinking. It watched and mimicked without comprehension, arranged its victims as a child might arrange dolls, collected objects not for their value but as specimens to be studied. Most disturbing is the question of whether it operated alone. The cave system extends for miles through the limestone hills, and certain evidence suggests multiple occupants over time. I cannot state with certainty that we have eliminated the threat entirely." Following the sealing of the cave in November 1910, the immediate crisis appeared resolved. No further disappearances occurred that winter, and by spring 1911, the community began cautiously returning to normal activities. The forest paths once again carried travelers, though most continued to observe the rule of three, never journeying alone through the deep woods. The warning published in the Taney County Republican became incorporated into local wisdom, passed from parents to children, alongside other practical survival knowledge. Corbett received commendations from both federal and local authorities before being reassigned to Kansas City, though his personal diaries indicate he continued to suffer nightmares about the case for years afterward. The sealed cave entrance was periodically checked by local authorities, remaining intact and showing no signs of disturbance. However, the story did not end with the cave's collapse. 3 subsequent incidents suggested the threat might not have been fully eliminated. In 1923, a hunter reported encountering a figure matching the original descriptions in a different section of forest, approximately 5 miles from the sealed cave. The entity reportedly observed him from a distance, but retreated when the hunter raised his rifle. In 1937, a solitary hiker vanished under circumstances eerily reminiscent of the 1910 disappearances. His knapsack found hanging from a tree branch with contents neatly arranged. Most significantly, a geological survey in 1952 discovered a secondary cave entrance miles from the sealed main entrance, showing evidence of recent use, including fresh scratch marks and arranged stones. An archaeological investigation of the original cave site, conducted after the entrance collapsed further naturally, recovered artifacts confirming long-term habitation, items dating from the early 1800s through 1910, suggesting the cave had served as a dwelling for at least a century. Analysis of fragmentary human remains found deep in accessible portions of the cave system indicated severe genetic abnormalities consistent with generations of isolation and inbreeding. Today, the forests that once concealed these horrors have been largely tamed. Highways cut through regions that were once accessible only by narrow paths, and tourist developments have replaced much of the wilderness that isolated Taney County in 1910. Yet certain tracks remain relatively untouched, particularly in the steep limestone hills and deep hollows away from the lakes and attractions. Modern hiking trails cross these areas, their route markers and safety guidelines evolving directly from warnings established over a century ago. Park rangers and conservation officers who patrol these regions acknowledge the persistent local beliefs. Ranger Michael Thompson, a 30-year veteran of the Missouri Department of Conservation, notes, "The old-timers still won't go into certain areas alone. They'll talk about the Watcher if you ask them, though most are hesitant to share those stories with outsiders. Documented incidents continue to occur occasionally. Hikers report sensations of being observed when no one is visible. Arrangements of stones or animal remains appear in geometric patterns that seem deliberate rather than natural, and rarely, typically in deep twilight, solitary figures are glimpsed at the forest edge, always distant, always motionless until observed directly. Long-time residents dismiss modern explanations of pareidolia or overactive imagination, insisting that the woods remember even if people forget. Their continued adherence to safety protocols is not mere superstition, but hard-earned wisdom preserved through generations. The limestone hills remain riddled with caves, many unexplored and unmapped, offering countless hidden entrances and passages. Fresh scratch marks occasionally appear on rocks near sealed openings, suggesting something still tests these barriers, patient and persistent. The forest waits, as it has always waited, for those who ignore the warnings, for solitary travelers who venture too deeply into the shadows between ancient trees where something watches. Something remembers when the woods provided abundant prey, something that learned long ago to arrange what it catches in terrible mimicry of human repose.